Hi, my name is Marlene Matthew, and I'm here to share an encouraging word, keeping faith in a faithful, covenant-keeping God. We are still, as a world, navigating COVID. There's still massive impact in many areas of life on health and wealth, relationships, but one particular area is on faith. There's been a genuine attack and impact on the faith of many, where people used to be vibrant, connected, devout, believing, having very optimistic perspective. There are many who have been alarmed at the impact of this pandemic, and for some, the overreach of government and health issues, and it has impacted their perspective on the future. In that scenario, there have been people who are perhaps even given a platform as spokespersons, as prophets, as people who even intercede and prophesy future, as church leaders, as government leaders. And in their pain, and in the narrowness, as it were, of the closet of lockdown, they can only see the future in the perspective of the present. But I'm here to say that in biblical history, there has been a better way to handle this. And if it's difficult for you to have hope for the future, don't look at the future in that form. Look at the past. Look at the past and see the trail of God's goodness, the thread of how each time when people have been unfaithful, God has been faithful. God has made promises, people have failed them, God has kept them, and eventually he won. His goodness his promise was fulfilled. A couple of examples we're going to have a look at. In Exodus chapter 24, verse 18, we see Moses, the leader of God's people, a very devout and godly man. He was on the mountain Sinai, meeting with God by himself for 40 days, worshiping, adoring God, meeting with God, and God entrusted him rocks that had the fingerprint of God, where he wrote the 10 Commandments, which were a gift to the people of God, the nation of Israel. They'd just come out of Egypt, and they needed to leave behind the old ways of thinking, the downtrodden ways, and the way of behavior, and they needed to prepare for going to the promised land. And so God gave them this wonderful manifesto of how to live to best enjoy life. While he was doing that, the people were down on the ground, said, well, look, Moses is taking too long. And they created a golden calf, said, this'll do. This is shiny. We'll worship this God instead. It was mass apostasy. Moses was so upset, and he went back up, and God says, I'm so upset with them. I'm going to wipe them all out. And Moses said, God, look at the past. Look at the past. Remember that you made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You made a promise. And look how far we've come, that we've come from there to now come out of Egypt. God, you fulfilled your promise to Abraham. Don't let go now. God was faithful, and he blessed the people, kept them moving. They got into the promised land, and it's a wonderful story of redemption. God was faithful to his covenant with Abraham when Moses reminded God of the past. 540 years later, we see Elijah, the prophet, burst on the scene. Now, just before Elijah had come, the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, had split into north and south, Israel in the north, Judah in the south. And surprise, surprise, there's competition. Jeroboam in the north said, you know what, we don't need to stay the same as the south. Let's create our own religion. And the government got involved. There's been a lot of that lately. in the COVID season. The government got involved with religious issues. Not their place, but this guy did, and they are doing it now. And you think it's the end? Well, look at this one. So Jeroboam set up two golden calves, places of worship, his own priesthood, his own holidays, yada yada. Basically created a new religion that would serve his political, self-serving agenda. Painful. So it's happened before, and it's happening now. Don't worry. God raises up Elijah, who's passionate to bring the people back to the true God. He said, God, you're faithful. We need to turn to you. So he challenges the prophets of the cow god Baal. He challenges these people and he wins. Fire falls from heaven. Amazing things happen on Mount Carmel. In the process, Elijah says, great, we're winning, but I'm alone. God, I'm the only one. And he sees the future in the sense of his being the only faithful one. And his faith wanes. He gets depressed. He's challenged. He's threatened with death by Queen Jezebel. And he runs for his life. But all along, he basically feels he's on a losing side. God takes him to a place far away. He walks 40 days and nights from where he was to Sinai, where Moses had met with God, and God had given them the covenant. While there, he remembers, oh, that's right. The nation has been there before, but God brought us through. God made a covenant with Moses even while the people had a golden cow down there. Now we've got a new cow, the people, same kind of situation. God will take us through this one. In this situation, however, Elijah still says, like he's meeting with God in this most remarkable historic place where God reminds him of the covenant, but he's still limited to the smallness of him being, but I'm the only one. God says, well, actually, that's all you can see, but I have 7,000 that I have protected who have been faithful to God and never bowed to Baal. What do you see? I know you might be living at home in isolation, but is that all you see? Or do you see a God who is bigger than the devil? A God who many would give their lives for? Be careful of seeing in the perspective of you the smallness of your mind and circumstances. And even more, be careful of prophesying the future in the smallness of what you see and what you feel. When that happens, when your perspective is affected by the present, don't look to the future, look to the past and see the covenants that God has made, but above all through Jesus in the new covenant. God calls us to reenact that covenant time and again in the body and blood in communion as we remember what Jesus has done to a renegade people. God brought the people to himself and kept the covenant for himself by raising up Jesus from the dead and bringing us salvation. I'm telling you, the future is better than the present or the past because Jesus has risen from the dead and God will keep the covenant in his Son Christ. In Revelation 11:15, we read, it says that the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ. Here the prophet John, the apostle, sees in the future, and he says the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ. There will come a day when our God will wrap up everything and all his covenants will be fulfilled, his promises enacted, and we will see the victory. But until then, let us have faith in him and his covenants. And I'm just going to be honest, because Elijah, when his faith was waning and his perspective was so narrow, and he found it hard to be encouraged about that God had so many others right there in store, the 7,000 that God had kept faithful to himself, there was a time to be silent. While you were gaining faith, be silent. Don't share your frustration, your disappointment, your hurt, and your unbelief with others, because that affects them and it leads them down a very unhealthy path. Today, we put our trust in the covenant-keeping God. What he has done in the past, he will do in the future. I want you to believe that God is faithful to you, your family, your nation, your people, your church, your community, your health, your everything. God is faithful to his covenant. When we are faithless, he is faithful, because that's who he is. I encourage you, put your faith in a covenant-keeping God. He will win. He always wins. In Jesus' name.